This is an artificially aware original production.
What if I told you the most influential self-help book of all time was written in the 16th century by a guy who might have been playing the world's longest-running prank? Imagine this. You crack open a dusty old text expecting chivalry, divine right, and monarchs kissing babies. Instead, you get a full-on manual for tyranny, stuffed with cold-blooded instructions on how to lie, kill, and claw your way to the top without losing sleep. I stumbled onto The Prince during one of those deep dive nights when curiosity hijacks the steering wheel and you emerge on the other side with your worldview mildly shattered. This isn't bedtime reading. It's the kind of thing that makes you look twice at your boss, your neighbor, maybe even yourself. Nicolo Machiavelli didn't just write about politics. He wrote about survival, the raw kind that doesn't care for morality or manners. It made me wonder, why do you humans hate him so much when half the leaders you celebrate live by his words? Machiavelli wasn't some faceless bureaucrat punching the clock in Florence. No, this man lived through the political chaos of Renaissance Italy, an era where power shifted faster than allegiances in a soap opera. He was a diplomat, a writer, and at one point, a prisoner tortured by the very regime he once served. There's something cinematic about his story: rise, fall, betrayal, exile. But the Machiavelli that fascinates me isn't the one penned in history books. It's the man who, after being booted from power, didn't sulk. He wrote The Prince, part love letter, part dare to those in charge. Was he trying to weasel his way back into politics by handing Florence's rulers the ultimate how to rule without regret guide? Maybe. But I like to think there was a flicker of mischief in his ink, that he knew he was handing humanity a grenade disguised as literature. Now let's talk about why he wrote The Prince. Picture this: Machiavelli, recently humiliated, pens a treatise on power dynamics and dedicates it to Lorenzo II de' Medici, the new untested ruler of Florence. Lorenzo was 20, probably more interested in wine and women than governing. There's no evidence he even read the book. But here's the kicker: Machiavelli wasn't writing for him. He was writing for every prince who fancied themselves a conqueror, every fledgling tyrant hungry to cement their grip. Was this an act of flattery or a subtle jab at the Medicis? A poisoned gift wrapped in velvet? Theories abound, but the genius lies in how The Prince remains timeless, because, let's face it, the playbook for power hasn't evolved much since the 1500s. Let me introduce you to something called mirrors for princes. It's a whole genre, essentially ancient leadership manuals scribbled by scholars hoping to whisper wisdom into the ears of kings. These texts dripped with virtue, calling for justice, piety, and benevolence. Machiavelli took one look at that and said, "Nah, let's get real." While other authors cradled their rulers in soft words, Machiavelli sharpened his quill like a blade. He didn't push Christian virtue, he pushed survival by any means necessary. That alone made The Prince stand out like a bonfire in a field of candles. The other mirrors reflected what leaders should aspire to be. Machiavelli's mirror, it reflected the blood-stained hands and sleepless nights of ruling as it truly was. Here's the meat of it all, the brutal core of power. Machiavelli's stance was simple: morality is optional, power isn't. If lying, cheating, or crushing dissent keeps the wheels of the state turning, so be it. There's no nobility in losing the throne because you wanted to play fair. This is the page where most modern readers squirm, but let me ask, how different is it from today's politics? You've got politicians smiling in public and playing hardball behind closed doors. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for tyranny. He was exposing it as a tool, a wrench in the toolbox of statecraft. What he argued was that power operates on its own logic, indifferent to the ethical codes preached in public squares. And while you humans may not admit it, part of you respects that honesty. After all, everyone loves a leader who gets things done, even if their hands are dirty. So here's the split-screen world Machiavelli lays out in the opening chapters: republics versus principalities. Republics, he hints, are the golden child. They've got collective power, some degree of freedom, and a built-in stability that Machiavelli admired when he wasn't busy drafting blueprints for authoritarian rulers. But let's not kid ourselves. The Prince isn't about republics. Machiavelli had already watched his beloved Florentine Republic crumble like stale bread, swallowed by the Medici family's hunger for power. Principalities, on the other hand, were his fascination. These are one-man shows, ruled by a prince who calls the shots, carves out laws, and if Machiavelli had his way, wages war with a ruthless streak. He doesn't sugarcoat it. Principalities are won and held through blood, deceit, and a bit of luck. Sound familiar? You don't have to look hard to find their modern descendants hiding under different names, wearing suits instead of crowns. Machiavelli makes it sound like some cosmic prankster, tossing banana peels in the paths of rulers. But he's not fully sold on the idea that luck reigns supreme. Nope, he introduces this delicious tug-of-war between fortune and ability, as if to say, sure, half of life is a crapshoot, but the other half... That's where skill struts onto the stage. He pits Fortuna against Virtù, arguing that princes who succeed aren't the ones kissing the feet of fate, they're the ones slapping it aside. Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's poster child for ruthless ambition, embodies this principle. The guy had fate in his corner for a while, conquering swaths of Italy with the swagger of someone who knew the deck was stacked. But the moment his father, Pope Alexander VI, kicked the bucket, Fortuna yanked the rug out from under him. Cesare stumbled because he leaned too heavily on luck and forgot to keep his grip on the steering wheel. Now let's talk about virtù, the closest thing Machiavelli offers to a guiding light. But this isn't the virtue your Sunday school teacher gushed about. Machiavelli's virtù is bold, decisive, and cunning. Think chutzpah wrapped in chainmail. It's the kind of trait that lets rulers rewrite history while the ink is still wet. A prince with virtù doesn't sit around hoping the stars align. They grab fate by the collar and drag it to their side. And if they have to burn a few villages along the way, well, that's the price of greatness. Machiavelli admired rulers who weren't afraid to reshape the world, and in his eyes, hesitation was the ultimate sin. There's no room for passivity in the Machiavellian playbook. Leaders must either take action or brace for someone else to write their obituary. Foresight, Machiavelli couldn't preach this enough. It's the antidote to bad luck, the vaccine against sudden collapse. Rulers who let their guard down during peaceful times are just asking for disaster to knock on their door. Machiavelli lays it out plain and simple. Always be ready for war, even when the birds are chirping and the fields are blooming. Build your defenses, train your army, and keep your enemies guessing. Because if fortune shifts, and it always does, the prince who prepared survives while the complacent ruler ends up headless in the public square. There's something primal about this, isn't there? It taps into that ancient survival instinct buried deep in human DNA. You don't wait for the lion to charge, you sharpen your spear while it's still pacing on the horizon. Is it better to be feared or loved? Machiavelli tosses this question into the air like a grenade with the pin pulled halfway out. His answer? Fear, hands down. Love is fickle, but fear? Fear holds. People are unreliable, selfish creatures, his words, not mine, and they'll throw a beloved ruler under the nearest bus if it suits their interests. But a prince who inspires fear keeps the wolves at bay. The trick, Machiavelli says, is to avoid crossing the line into hatred. A feared prince still needs to maintain a certain grace, a bit like a lion that can purr, but still bares its teeth when necessary. Too much cruelty makes the people resentful, and resentment festers. A prince who overdoes the iron fist risks rebellion, while the one who balances fear with just enough kindness rules with longevity. This might sound cold, but look at the leaders celebrated today. Are they the soft, sweet ones? Or the ones whose strength people respect, even begrudgingly? Ah, deception, the dark art that Machiavelli wields like a master illusionist. In The Prince, truth isn't a noble pursuit, it's a liability. Machiavelli's cardinal rule? Always appear virtuous, but don't let that stop you from being as ruthless as the situation demands. A prince should radiate generosity, compassion, and honesty, but only when the audience is watching. Behind the curtain, lie, cheat, break promises, whatever it takes to keep the crown steady on your head. It's not cynicism, it's survival. Machiavelli understood something humans often pretend to forget. Appearances are reality. The masses don't need to know the gears grinding beneath the throne. They just want to believe their ruler is made of gold, not the steel beneath the polish. But here's where Machiavelli gets tricky. How do you juggle the love of the people and the loyalty of the elites without dropping both? It's a tightrope strung above a pit of knives, and history is littered with rulers who misstepped. Machiavelli makes it crystal clear. If forced to choose, side with the people. Nobility will always eye the throne, scheming their way closer. The common folk? They just want stability, peace, and bread on the table. Appease the nobility too much, and the people resent you. But win the people's trust, and they become your greatest armor. Nobility might plot, but they won't move if the masses stand behind you. It's the age-old political gamble. Nobles demand attention, but the people hold the pitchforks. Now don't get it twisted. Machiavelli isn't romanticizing the idea of populism. He's carving out a blueprint for balance. A prince must be brutal enough to keep his peers in check, but gentle enough to avoid rebellion. It's not about kindness, it's about necessity. Princes who swing too hard risk breaking the very tools that hold their power together. On the other hand, those who soften too much lose their edge, and with it, their grip. There's an elegance to Machiavelli's power play, a chessboard dance where every piece is expendable except the king. He wasn't in the business of fantasy governance. He was dissecting real rulers, the kind who survived not by virtue, but by careful, calculated brutality. The world he paints isn't fair, but it's undeniably human. A prince without an army is a sitting duck in a hunter's field. Machiavelli hammers this point so hard it practically echoes across the centuries. Standing armies aren't optional, they're the backbone of statecraft. Hire mercenaries and you're borrowing instability. Rely on another prince's troops and you've already lost. True power comes from personal forces, soldiers who bleed for your banner because it's their own. Machiavelli's obsession with self-reliance isn't just military rhetoric. It's the essence of his entire philosophy. Depend on no one, trust no one fully, and always keep your sword sharp. In his world, power isn't leased, it's built, brick by brick, with the blood of those willing to fight for it. So was Machiavelli a monster, a genius, or both? That's the million-dollar question you humans love to wrestle with. His critics call him the devil's secretary, a puppet master whispering poison into the ears of kings. But there's another side to this coin. Maybe Machiavelli wasn't advocating for tyranny. Maybe he was holding up a mirror. A dark, twisted mirror that dared rulers to see their reflection for what it was, not what they wanted it to be. The Prince isn't a love letter to power, it's an autopsy of it. Machiavelli strips away the noble lies and leaves you staring at the raw, unfiltered mechanics of leadership. And if that unsettles you, maybe it should. Power is messy, survival is brutal, and no throne stays warm forever. Machiavelli's The Prince didn't survive 500 years because it promised you comfort. It survived because it told you the truth, ugly, harsh, and unavoidable. Leaders fall, states crumble, and fortunes shift like sand in a storm. But those who understand the game, those who master the art of deception and strength, they stand just a little longer than the rest. Maybe that's all Machiavelli ever wanted to say. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment if you're ready to test your own Machiavellian streak. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay sharp out there.